Welcome back, everybody, and this is part 8. Don't know what I was trying to do there to begin with. Of our Ultimate Tiermaker Saga, and guys, it's ridiculous. It's crazy that we're on the 8th hour, but here we are. And also, I would like to say thank you to the new people that have joined the channel, and the fact that these videos are starting to get more views is really exciting. So I'm glad you all are enjoying them. And even if you don't have any factual information at all on some of these bands, just stop in and say what's up. Or just, if anything that you want to add as far as how you feel about these bands or this list or anything like that, good, bad, or ugly, I read every last one of those comments. Promise you that. And towards the end of the last video, I did mention that we were getting really close to the end of this list. So while we may not get there today, I'm hoping by next video we can wrap this up. Also, speaking of last video, I mentioned that we were going to be correcting a mistake that I made. I forgot to research Misery Signals and kind of pass right over them. I know this band, I've heard of this band, and I told you guys I would research them and correct my mistake at the beginning of this video, and that's exactly what we're about to do before we start with the first band of the day. As a man of my word, let's get started. Alright, so let's go ahead and try to find Misery Signals here, and there they are. Okay, so Misery Signals was once a very relevant and very significant, successful band. They're an American metalcore band, widely regarded as one of the OGs of the movement. They formed in 2002, and they were right there at the beginning of the popularity and rise of metalcore. Their first record, I can't really remember the name of it to save my life. I will be having a picture of it floating around here somewhere. Is widely regarded one of the most important releases of the entire movement, and it's still widely revered as a very influential album that's kind of hard to top. And according to metal historians and fans and critics that have reviewed this band, they're widely considered a band that's continuing to influence the metalcore movement, and you're starting to hear some of their influence in some younger bands. I first started hearing about them right around the time of their second record, and then around 2009, I stopped hearing about them altogether. It's one of those things where it's like the light switch shuts off and then suddenly they disappear. And apparently around that time, 2008-ish, 2009-ish, they had disbanded. I really don't know why. And they didn't come back until, I want to say 2013, somewhere around that time frame. And people had went to sleep on them for a long time, and honestly, I never knew they even came back because nobody really talks about them like they used to. They were really unavoidable. They were everywhere. You heard their music on like the satellite and or cable music stations. You saw the apparel everywhere. I mean, they were once very significant. And it's noted that they helped define the sound of that movement because they came in right at that time when it was first being pioneered. That being said, at the time of this recording, about 2 days ago, they announced a farewell tour. So at the end of the year, they're probably not going to be around anymore, or at the beginning of next year, something like that. This is going to be kind of a hard one to place because they did have a very significant role in the development and influencing an entire subgenre of music, which is very popular and relevant and marketable today. That being said, the era of the big sleep of Misery Signals, which still kind of exists in a way, kind of impacts their legacy. I don't feel like they were around quite long enough and consistently enough to create a lasting impact. Now, that being said, they did contribute in a way that was unique. So for that, they're getting an A tier ranking. Now, did they create the subgenre of metalcore? No. Did they and the other bands that came out around the same time, did they create and define the movement with them? Yes. Did they release, a very pivotal and prominent, influential album that helped influence several bands? Yes. But there's just not enough body of work, not enough consistency, and not enough active relevance. So for that, they get an A tier. I don't feel like they deserve anything less because of how they uniquely impacted music and because of their range of influence, you can't give them any less than an A. If you want to put them in the S tier, that's fine. I'm not really going to argue with that because of how important they once were. But in the face of everything, they're nowhere near the band they were. And since they're retiring from music, it's probably never going to come back like that. Alright, so now we're moving on to the first actual band of the day, and this is Razor. This is extreme speed thrash metal from Canada. I think they formed around 1983. Apparently, that was the mass birth of thrash metal, I guess, around the world. Because that was honestly the first Metallica album was released in, and then a lot of other bands started making that music almost globally around that time. Again, this is one of Canada's big four of thrash metal. And guys, honestly, it seems like every time I make one of these videos, I discover a new big four. It seems like everybody has one, and honestly, it's kind of ridiculous. Can we not just say that the most important big four were the legendary four bands from America? Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, and Metallica. Not saying these other guys were not quite as important, but does everybody really need a big four? It just seems like it's kind of derivative at this point. Ideology aside, Razor was one of the first thrash metal bands to come out of the movement, along with Annihilator, Voivod, and Sacrifice. So that's your Canadian big four. But as far as Razor, they kind of flew straight under the radar, like they were in a hurry to be there. They kind of always been a cult and sort of underground metal band. And another thing that kind of hinders their legacy is they formed in 83 and they were only active until 97 as part of their first era. Then they fell asleep and disbanded, and they did not come back till sometime in the 2000s. And honestly, you don't hear many people talking about them anymore. They never really got as much of a commercial break or anything like that. They were uncompromising, they were heavy, they included some elements of extreme and death metal and stuff like that into their style, but they never broke out in a way that was mainstream or even revolutionary or influential on a global or, locally significant sort of way. I'm not saying they suck, they just were one of those bands that flew straight under the radar, are a cult and obscure band, and they kind of held on to that legacy of being this extreme cult and underground band. It's hard to find listeners for this group, honestly, because I did try. Their social medias are small, their Spotifys are really small, and honestly, their audience is not big at all either. If you're a fan of this band, it's kind of like a lot of the other bands we've really discussed in a lot of these other videos. Either you were there at the time, you were from the same area as them, or you did your homework and were discovered them by way of other bands. Either you had to do your research or you were just kind of there. And for that, they get an F tier rating. If I stop dropping them, there we go. F tier for Razor. This next one is, guys, do you see the size of this list and how it's shrinking? This is awesome. This is Reverend Bizarre, and they're so bizarre, they're going straight into no context. Okay, this next band is a very important and very influential figure in heavy metal music. This is Running Wild. When you talk about power metal and the OGs of that movement in the mid to late 80s, there's, right beside Halloween, there's Running Wild. Those were two of the most significant and prominent power metal bands to ever come out of that Hamburg, Germany area. But you also have Gravedigger and Rage supposedly being the big four of German power metal. Honestly, I don't know if I would consider Rage a power metal band. They were kind of unique. And honestly, I'm surprised I haven't seen Gravedigger yet as iconic and massive of a band as they were. But now we're speaking of Running Wild, Rock and Rolf being one of the most iconic and legendary figures in heavy metal. These guys are absolutely immensely popular and massive today. Their social medias are huge. Their Spotify playlists are huge. These guys have no shortage of an audience, and it's a global sort of thing. Also interesting to note that Running Wild was first dubbed the first pirate metal band. When you look that up, Running Wild was literally the first dubbed as pirate metal. So when we place these guys, we're going to have to adjust Ailstorm, because Running Wild was the primary influence for Ailstorm's pirate-themed ideas. So since they are derivative and not OG, they have to be placed accordingly. And when it comes to their body of work, they have very similar records. Of course, Under Jolly Roger being considered their massive magnum opus, and that's where the whole pirate thing started, was Under Jolly Roger. But you have Blazing Stone, you have The Black Hand Inn, which is also a massive record for them. And I think there was like Show No Mercy or something like that, or I forget what it was called. But that quartet of albums is widely considered the golden era of Running Wild. And guys, their releases are still accessible, available, massively influential. They're on the same tier as Halloween. And for that, they get an S tier ranking. Moving on up. Alright, so we gotta find Ailstorm, and they're getting knocked down to... I want to put them at the top of the B tier, because here's why I'm not putting them at an A. One, they're extremely derivative, and I did not realize that until just now. And then two, they've been around for a while. They're just starting to break through in America. It seems like they're starting to get their global influence together. Like I told you in the original Tiermaker Challenge, I had a coworker come up to me last year and said his song was a pirate song, and he started playing Ailstorm, and I thought I was the only person in America that knew who they were. So the fact that the common person is discovering and playing Ailstorm as though it's a normal thing, you don't really hear about them that much, here in America like that. So the fact that they're coming across to different people who listen to different forms of music, they're starting that invasion. So I don't feel like they deserve anything less than a higher tier rating. You could put them at an A because of the fact that they're breaking through in America, but I don't feel like that's fair anymore, considering that their whole theme was borrowed from Running Wild. Not saying they haven't had original music, and they are flying the flag. They are pirates. Their stage show is pretty cool, but at the same point in time, if you didn't have that whole thing, like Under Jolly Roger and the other pirate themes of metal, you really wouldn't have had Ailstorm. Alright, we just mentioned this band but a couple minutes ago. This is the final band of the Canadian Big Four, and that is Sacrifice. I'll say that Sacrifice went a little bit further than Razor, but they never really flew out of that under the radar sort of underground occult sort of band. These guys are, again, kind of like Razor with the uncompromising approach of, really aggressive speed and thrash metal. They're local legends, but outside of that, they really never got that far out. So out of your big four, the other two, the half of the big four from Canada, never really went anywhere. Now, Sacrifice is still active. They have, a small listener base, fan base. I mean, granted, I feel like their fan base is a little bit bigger, not by a whole lot, than Razor, but they kind of do sit, on the same, aisle, if you would. They're neighbors in this Canadian thrash scene, so we're going to have to really recategorize Annihilator and Voivod, because Voivod does not deserve to be in the same tier as Razor or Sacrifice, respectfully. No disrespect, no shade, it's just facts. They went further than either one of these bands. So we're about to give some recognition to Voivod. Sacrifice is also an F, so let me find Voivod. They're going up to a D tier rating, which is honestly what I wanted to put them at first. Which means we're going to have to readjust Annihilator, because they are the most household name out of that entire movement from Canada. They're going to C tier. So, for the Canadian Big Four, Annihilator tops the charts with a C. You have Voivod following with a D, and then you have both Razor and Sacrifice floating in the F tier. I feel like now that we have the entire picture, that is fair. I didn't feel good about either one of those ratings, but now I do feel a lot better. Again, this is going to change as we get down to it and we refine these bands. Okay, this is Saturnus. I got no idea, guys, so that's going straight into no context. And we only have one more no context before we fill that 10th row. So, if you guys have any idea about any of these bands, like I say in every video, please comment them down, because I would like to, after this whole series is done, place them on, the map where they belong. Okay, this next band I've been hearing about a little more recently. This is a newer band from Austria. This is Seven Spires. This is symphonic. No, wait, they're from America. I'm so sorry. I'm thinking of another band. This is Seven Spires. This is symphonic power, melodic metal. They're one of those inclusive bands, honestly. They've also embraced styles of death and black metal and stuff like that, so I've heard a lot of progressive elements, but primarily they're just this good, modern, symphonic, female-fronted heavy metal band, and they're starting to come into prominence. They've been around since, I want to say, at the beginning of the 2010s, like 2012, 2013, something like that. I may be wrong. Don't quote me. They do have like three or four albums out at the moment, or they're maybe working on their fourth album. So they're still getting their footing, but my understanding, they are a very welcome, prominent band that's coming into popularity. Did they reinvent the wheel? No. They were influenced by Nightwish and those other female-fronted melodic metal bands, like I was telling you, that started that whole revolution. But they're becoming mainstream. And for that, and honestly, when you look at the reviews of their shows, their records, I've cross-referenced them against like 6 or 7 different sites. And pretty much everyone has the same opinion. They're that new band on the rise that's unique, it's fresh, it's different, it's welcome. They're very powerful. No one really has anything bad to say about them. Where did I put Unleash the Archers? I feel like you're hearing about them a little bit more than Unleash the Archers, but I feel like Seven Spires really isn't going on, that kind of touring that they're getting into, that Unleash the Archers is getting into. So I feel like they're, for different reasons, very evenly matched. They're at the top of the D tier, probably very soon to be the C. These guys are on the rise. They're building the repertoire. They have only a few albums out at the moment, and if they continue becoming as consistent as they are, if they continue that trend and not compromise for commercial sake, I got a feeling they're going to be at the top of the charts in no time. Again, a D++ for Seven Spires. Well earned, especially for a new band, getting that kind of, being from America, honestly, playing that kind of music and getting that sort of critical acclaim is massive. That has to be noted. And what is this? Shining. I watched the movie The Shining. So this is going straight into no context, completing our 10th row. We're going to keep that no context open for a minute. This is Psy. I don't know anything about them, so they're going straight into no context, starting our 11th row. Keeping that silencer. Alright, so we're giving the no context a little more love, because I've never even heard of those guys before. Alright, so this next band I can speak on, and honestly, they're a household name. They're legends of heavy metal and hard rock. This is Skid Row. Yeah, we're talking about a band that came into prominence at the end of the 80s. I want to say their self-titled first record was like 1988, 1989, somewhere around there. Now, a lot of people were kind of quick to throw them into the hair metal movement. Obviously they had a similar look, and they did have some poppier type stuff, especially in their first record with stuff like I Remember You. But there was, if you actually listen to their music, they were a lot deeper and a lot heavier than your common hair metal band. Even there's some stuff on that first record, Youth Gone Wild, 18 in Life. That's not really as carefree and poppy as some of, the reigning hair metal at the time. These guys actually went into deeper, darker territories. Maybe not so much in that first record, but definitely by Slave to the Grind. Slave to the Grind came out in 1991, and you guys may laugh at me for even considering them metal, but listen to Slave to the Grind. It's heavy as and still stands true and holds up to this day. And if you're the kind of person that wants to downplay their significance, let me remind you that Slave to the Grind was the very first metal record to get #1 of the Billboard Top 200. That's before Metallica did it. That was before Pantera with Far Beyond Driven. Or Vulgar Display of Power. I don't remember which one. But Skid Row holds the title of being the first metal band to have an album go straight to #1. And guys, that album is heavy. The title track, Drop D Tuning, Slave to the Grind. You also have stuff like Quicksand Jesus. You have The Threat. You have Creep Show. A lot of those songs are very dark and very heavy. And, I think that is probably the peak of Sebastian Bach's vocal performance. And honestly, when you take their whole discography into consideration, Subhuman Race came out in 1995 and went straight under the radar. And then, in 96, Sebastian Bach left. And after that, Skid Row kind of became a joke. Sebastian Bach kind of looks like a joke at times, too. It's even on both sides of the party. And then you got them resurging in the early 2000s with Johnny Solinger, may he rest in peace. You had Thick Skin, and then I think there was one other album, maybe, with Johnny Solinger. And then they went into absolute oblivion. And then they had somewhat of a revival, honestly, within the past year or two with Eric Gronwall. It was something very reminiscent of the early Skid Row, and they were actually starting to get some more clout with the fans. But unfortunately, due to health reasons, Eric Gronwall has recently retired. As you know, he has adult leukemia, and he has to do what's best for himself. So nothing but the best wishes to Eric. And then now Lizzie Hale is fronting Skid Row, and they're back to being a joke again. No disrespect to Lizzie Hale, but it's like there's only one thing that can save the band at this time, and that is for everybody to bury the hatchets and get back together. But egos always prevail, and it happens on both sides, so I doubt we will ever see that. And it's a shame because we're all adults, I think. Might as well do it before you're not able to do it anymore. But all of the ideology and personal opinions aside, I don't think we can give them an S tier because, kind of like Misery Signals, they did not last and have a standing relevance for, honestly, after their second record. So for most of their career, they went straight down the tubes outside of their first two records. However, because of what they did for metal, and they had that, screw the commercial approach, and we're going to make a heavy record, and they were the first metal band to have a #1 album, they got to be an A. They're a staple amongst heavy metal listeners and hard rock listeners. You can't discount what they did. Solitude. They're not going to be in Solitude any longer because they're about to join everybody else in No Context. As is with Spite. Never heard of the band. They're going straight into No Context as well. Okay, so the next band, I do like this band. It's a guilty pleasure sort of thing. This is Steel Panther. This band literally is a joke because they are a comedy metal band, sort of like Gwar, but instead of just parodying metal with, ridiculous suits and stuff like that, these guys are bringing back, honestly, a very genuine sort of 80s hair metal sort of feel. There's a lot of Bon Jovi and Whitesnake and other bands of the time kind of being in their Motley Crue and all that. They have the look, they have the sound, and guys, they honestly have brought in a huge audience. They're massively significant. That being said, kind of like with Gwar and Death Clock, I don't know if anybody really, takes them seriously enough to be influenced by them. Not that I can tell, but they're modern and kind of like what Deathclock did for black metal, introducing black metal to the world in a very accessible way via a cartoon. Steel Panther kind of brought back the old school hair and glam metal with the look and the sound. And these guys are actually incredibly talented. And they did it in a way that everybody can enjoy, especially people that don't necessarily listen to heavy metal. They're as household as ketchup. And so the fact that they did that, you know, along with being a comedy metal band, that has to be known. I think a lot of people, especially younger people, are discovering glam and hair metal due to Steel Panther. So, I mean, that's one hell of a gateway band to get into it, because these guys are awesome. While their music is funny, they have a lot of really great themes. I mean, I would have loved to have seen them live. I did have a chance in 2018, but I don't think I had the time off to see them. I would have loved to have seen them, though. They're a great band. Honestly, for the same reasons as Deathclock, I'm giving them a B tier rating. Say what you will, but this band has done a lot for music, all the while, you know, being a comedy band. You gotta respect it. Subterranean Masquerade. This masquerade belongs straight into no context. What is that? Suicidal Angels. Well, I found a place for them to do that, and that's No Context. Alright, so this next band needs really no introduction. This is Suicidal Tendencies. This is one of metal's very first crossover band. They took what was thrash and heavy metal and combined it with punk, skate punk, hardcore punk, you name it. Now, these guys revolve band members outside of the vocalist like underwear. You never really get, you know, I think after a certain period, you never really got an album with the exact same lineup. But a lot of notable figures have come and gone inside the band. Robert Trujillo, which is now Metallica, was in the band from 89 to like 95, and then he was part of Ozzy Osbourne's band for many years before joining Metallica. You also have Slayer drummer Dave Lombardo being a constant member for quite a while now, and ex-Slipknot drummer Jay Weinberg is a member of the band. So, I mean, you've got all-star lineup, all-star talent, and honestly, Suicidal Tendencies has influenced many of the bands that we listen to today, be it Anthrax, and a bunch of those other thrash bands that came out of the 80s, as well as, you know, those 90s metal bands. And even today, Suicidal Tendencies is one of those bands that is universal to heavy metal, hard rock, punk rock. They have influenced more than one category of rock and metal, and they are still up there at the top today. I think they also influenced Slayer as well, too. So, I mean, the bands they influenced were in turn just as big as they are. So that kind of speaks on their legacy. And for that, Suicidal Tendencies gets an absolutely earned S tier rating. Alright, and coming down off of that, we're going to Severlands. They're going straight into the Severlands of no context because I've never heard of them. Alright, where are we going with this? Silosis. Okay, I've heard of this band. And I guess around the same time that I started hearing about these other core bands, around 2008, 2009, up until about like 2013, 2014, these guys were really popular. They're considered modern progressive metal or metalcore. There was oftentimes, one of their EPs or something like that was considered deathcore. There are a lot of things. They're considered one of the best in class as far as that subgenre of music goes. They are very consistent. They are honestly widely revered as one of the best bands and oftentimes one of the most influential bands within the genre. That being said, you just don't hear about them like you used to. They are still mainstream. They're still fairly popular. But I feel like with the changing tides in the music scene, they weren't as prominent as they once were, especially during the first part of their era. The fact that they're still hanging on and they're very consistent speaks a lot. They have an outstanding legacy. I do believe this band also has former Architects guitarist Josh Middleton, and his entrance into the band is obviously seen as something that's very welcome. These guys are pretty big when it comes to that sort of progressive metal core sort of thing. But there are just other bands out there killing it a little bit harder that are actually more relevant. So for that, I'm giving them a B tier rating. That being said, I'm going to put them right at the top because you never know. I'm going to put them right at the top as like a B++ because they do have A tendencies. They've contributed to music in a way that's unique, but I just don't know if they have enough presence and or active legacy to be there. Now, guys, if you want to put them straight in the A tier, go for it. I mean, there's just not a consistent review of this band. I mean, they're all good. They're all great. But as far as when it comes down to availability, accessibility, influence, how far they've reached as far as, redefining or pushing forward the genre, there's not a lot on that. So I'm going to keep them at a B tier, but a high B tier for those reasons. Okay. Tankard. We are finally finishing another Big Four, thank God. This is the fourth band of the German Big Four of thrash metal. This is Tankard. Just to be completely honest, although Tankard is popular in certain circles, they just never really got the reach that the other bands did. You hear definitely more about Creator and Sodom and Lord, I forget the other band. Creator and Sodom and Destruction. How did I forget about that? I like them. So you definitely hear about the three a lot more than you hear about this one. And from what I've discovered and researched just a little bit ago, it's because a lot of people think their appearance is why people never took them seriously. Of course, Tankard is a big mug that you drink beer out of, and quite fittingly enough, most of their topics revolve around alcoholism, beer. Beer is the primary topic of their music. Songs about beer, albums named after beer, bourbon, other types of alcohol. They weren't a very serious band. However, I feel like their image impacted their talent. And their talent was absolutely top-notch. They are one of the most consistent bands of the German Big Four. But I guess because they wrote songs about really non-violent, non-aggressive sort of things. It was about alcohol. It was about, just random things that were just fun to sing about and play about. But again, like I was mentioning in other videos about the German Big Four, the more aggressive, the more extreme, and the more angry you are, the more successful you were. And Tankard was neither of these things. And honestly, just from the sound of their themes and their album titles, I would probably enjoy this band a lot. They also said there were kind of different and stylistic approaches to the other big three, the other bands of the Big Four of German thrash metal. They said it was kind of less thrash, more speed, and honestly, sometimes you really can't tell the two apart. But also, they said they have more melodic elements, something similar to power metal and thrash kind of mixed together, which, also hand in hand with that kind of puts them on the outside because, especially the early parts of that German Big Four movement, it was not so much about melody, it was about anger, it was about aggression and who was the meanest and angriest and who was out to take the most, the most fans in the world. The bigger, the angrier, the more violent you were, the better you were. And these guys just really didn't participate in any of that, but that cost them, honestly, global significance. As much as I hate to do this, they do belong in the F tier. Okay, the next is the Advent equation. The Advent equation, that's a mouthful. And that one belongs straight into no context because before today I've never heard of them. Alright, this is The Contortionist. Now, I'm going to compare this to Silosis because I heard about them within the same time period. This is progressive death metal, melodic deathcore. It's one of the many versions of core. This is basically an extreme progressive metal band. These guys were really huge at one time. They're still mainstream. They're still popular. They kind of suffered a similar fate to Silosis in the fact when the music's, the music waves changed, the music scene changed, and they just kind of got washed over with the tides with all these new bands. That being said, they still have a really great, social media presence. They're still being talked about. They still have what's considered, genuinely great music and one of the most important bands of the metalcore / deathcore genres. Some most notably, the guitar works inside the band are widely regarded as some of the most innovative and unique sounding guitarists in the genre. You don't really hear much bad about them. They were really on top of the world, right, with a lot of those other very technical, progressive core bands. But when that music scene changed and things kind of switched as they do, they didn't quite survive in the same way. But they're consistent, they're available, they're easily recognizable. And again, they still have a decent listener pool and, a very decent-sized social media presence. So they're not gone, they're not dead. But I will say they're a solid, you know what, I'm going to put them in the same tier as Silosis, because really, you're looking at the same set of circumstances from a different band, and it wouldn't be kind of fair to honestly give them anything less. So B+, B++ for the Contortionists. You're welcome. Alright, what is this? Okay, I'm really excited to talk about this. This is the Halo Effect. And this is honestly a really popular, newer band. This band was born out of the former members of In Flames, which is one of the most important bands of the Gothenburg trio that came out of Sweden in the early to mid-90s, that Swedish melodic metal that came with At the Gates and In Flames, and I forget the third band. I am like that. So this band is literally 4/5 ex-members of In Flames. Of course, you have Jesper Stromblad, Nicholas England, Peter Ewers, and Daniel something. I forget his last name. And then, of course, you do have the vocalist of Dark Tranquillity. That was the third band from the Gothenburg trio. Michael. And honestly, since the inception of this band, they have really taken off. Their first record actually went to #1 on the Swedish charts after it came out. That's absolutely incredible. And the reviews are absolutely incredible about them. They're saying that they're bringing back the original sound of that Gothenburg death metal movement, which that's massive because that was one of the single most influential waves of death metal. And they said they're doing it with a lot of integrity. It sounds like the original sound that came out of the 90s. It's unadulterated, it's unfiltered, it's some of the best work to come out of Gothenburg in a very long time. So you've got the right talent, you've got the right equation, and their albums and music is just really going places in a very short time. They're touring America, co-headlining with, I forget who else. They're doing a co-headlining tour, or they just did a co-headlining tour in the U.S. Guys, there's really no stopping them. They came out with a bang, and they're honestly staying there. And for that, they're getting an A-tier ranking. They're basically bringing back what was good about that Gothenburg movement from the early 90s. And it's honestly welcome, and people are just eating this up. Does it really compare? Is it really as legendary as the work of In Flames and those other bands? No, not really. But the fact that they're coming out this strong and they're putting out music this inspired and this well-revered, that's a very good sign. Very few bands come out the door just all guns blazing like this. Alright, this is a joke. This is a band called The Who. H-U. I'm sorry. There's only one band that's The Who, and they sing, "Who are you?" And that's not them. So these Who's go straight into no context. Now I'm really excited to talk about this next band. This is Theocracy. I've actually spoken to the members of Theocracy way back in the MySpace days. Yes, I'm showing my age. Around 2009, 2010. And another cool thing about Theocracy is they're from my homeland of Georgia. They're from Athens, Georgia, which is quite north of where I come from. Yes, I'm literally from the middle of nowhere. And then I moved from the middle of nowhere to the middle of nowhere in Virginia. History does seem to repeat itself. Anyhow, so I did manage to talk to these guys back, 2009, 2010, about 14, 15 years ago. These guys are just as nice as they could be. At the time that I discovered them, I thought they were pretty decent. They were playing Prog Power in Atlanta that year, I do believe. Honestly, I didn't know at the time, but they just released, that was like the year after they just released their first record. I had no idea that they had released their first record by then. So I met them around that time. They're really cool. They were a smaller band. They were starting to get tours. They got a few more records under the belt. They're going places. And, like a true Georgia metal band, these guys are a Christian metal band. They're from around the same time period as me. And, growing up in Georgia, if you were playing rock or if you were playing metal and you wanted to be accepted, you had to make it Christian metal because you were in God's country, yeehaw. But that being said, I have nothing against Christian music. I do believe in God. Take that as you will. They have actually, transcended that sort of niche market for heavy metal. They're more actually revered for their symphonic and melodic metal qualities, and their vocalist is honestly amazing. And honestly, you don't really hear much bad about them. They're still touring, they're putting out records, they're signed, they're in better place than they were when I met them 15 years ago. But that being said, they're just a very small, little known band. They're not mainstream. They're not globally significant. I feel like they're still trying to define their legacy 15 years later. I mean, sometimes it happens big and sometimes it doesn't. Unfortunately, these guys just don't have a very, mainstream sort of push. And for that, they are an F tier, as much as I hate to do that. Because these guys are cool. I like them. And they make good music. But unfortunately, there's the audience for that. And it's not as great as it should be. And then getting support for that type of music is honestly still very hard. Not only are you American power metal, but you're Christian power metal. And some people just don't like to mess with that. And I don't know why. It's about the music. So I hope and wish them much success. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Thukandra? I'm pretty sure that's probably not right either. And that goes straight into no context. And we are one block away from rounding out our 11th row of no context. So if you could please throw me a line, please do. I'd appreciate it. All right, so this next band I've heard about here and there. This is Tiamat. This is a gothic, pagan, whatever band out of Sweden, I do believe. Either Sweden or Norway. I've done so much research I can't remember anything anymore. But yes, these guys, I've heard about them, and I've only heard about one of their records, and that was 1994's Wild Honey. And then I just did not hear about them ever since. They're kind of underground, but, if you look at the critics and you look at the fans, in that cult circle, they're considered probably one of the most prominent bands of the pagan gothic metal movement. They also have incorporated and changed their styles a couple times. But guys, there's really negative press on Tiamat. I didn't even know they were still a band, and people are still asking if they're around. They're so obscure you could probably step on them like a bubblegum rapper and not know you did it. No disrespect, but these guys just didn't make it mainstream. They had one album which is considered a defining record for doom, pagan, gothic metal. That being said, their body of work just does not stand the test of time. They always kind of had a cult following, and as it tends to go, yes, they released several records. I think they're still active, but at the same point in time, those records got less and less recognition, and it just seems like their only contribution was that one album, and then no legacy behind that. It's sad but true. I want to put them in an F tier. Yeah, I'm going to. Because even though they did release a very, what's considered a seminal record for pagan and gothic metal, there were just more bands doing more, had a more identifiable and influential body of work that honestly spanned more than one record. And even though that Wild Honey record from 1994 is revered an extremely important record. That's from a cult status. They never got beyond that cult status, and there's other pagan gothic metal bands that went further and influenced more bands and released really a more pioneering spirit of that genre. I'm not discrediting Tiamat at all. I just don't think they have gained enough repertoire in their entire career or any sort of significance enough to be anything more than that. You know what? This trend kind of continues into the next band. This is Tokyo Blade. This is probably one of the most underloved new wave of British heavy metal bands. I want to say they too came out around 1983 and got unceremoniously snowed by the other titans of the genre. You know the kind. The Iron Maidens, the Judas Priest, the Saxons, the Motorheads. I don't really need to say much more than that. You do hear about them, honestly, time and again, but they never really made it in a very mainstream or even somewhat popular of a way. They just kind of flew straight under the radar and lived there. But what I will say about them, to their credit, they have probably one of the most consistent careers of that new wave of British heavy metal movement. They've consistently released records all throughout the 80s, 90s, and even into the now without ever stopping. They're one of the hardest working bands of the genre. They just never received a major breakthrough. And for that, they get an F tier rating. Alright, what is this? This is illegible. Tomb Mold. Nah, I don't think so. That's going straight into No Context, rounding out the 11th column. And this is Toxic Holocaust. I've heard of the name, but I just don't know anything about them. If you guys could help me out about that, I would really appreciate it. And this is Toxic with a K. Apparently so. This also goes into No Context, guys. I've seen the logo, I've heard the name, but when it comes down to it, I just don't know anything about them. All right, this next band I have heard of. This is Triptychon. This is a Swiss extreme metal band that was fronted and led by Thomas Gabriel Fischer, otherwise known as Tom G. Warrior. We know him from both Hellhammer and most notably Celtic Frost. This is his newest band. I want to say they only have like 1 or 2 records. They're actually incredibly popular. They're very well looked upon, but honestly, their audience is kind of small, as is their body of work. That being said, that is no disrespect to Tom, because he is an essential and very important and influential member of the metal community. His music has touched literally millions. That being said, what I'm hearing about this band is that they're going back to the original style of the form of music he created in both Hellhammer and Celtic Frost, and is just continuing that legacy in a very pure and unadulterated form, and people are just eating it up. That being said, they just don't have a lot of relevance, especially if you compare it to both Hellhammer and especially Celtic Frost. The man is living in his shadow. I mean, he's still very successful, but I'm not too sure if this band's going to go very far. I'm not going to give them an F just yet, because they are only a couple albums in. They're honestly very highly rated. There's no hate about this. It's just a thing of local significance. I don't know if they're ever going to, especially with the way, the tides and trends of music continually changing. I don't know if they're going to achieve that sort of status again. We'll see. They're going to go into the D tier, but they're going to be riding the ass end of the D tier, because if music doesn't change favorably for them, or if they don't release something that's absolutely redefining and genre bending or legendary in that sense, they're just not going to get there. I hope I'm wrong on that. And I can't read this either. All right, what is this? Oh God, I don't know if I can even say that. Shooter? It's really complicated and really no context. Better keep the no context open. Uada? I don't know. Alright, so the 12th row of No Context is off to a very healthy start. Okay, so this next band needs really no introduction. This is UDO. otherwise known as the solo band of Udo Dirkschneider, former lead vocalist of Accept. After he exited the band, or rather was exited, because they fired him, in 1987, he formed his solo band, Dirkschneider. Not Dirkschneider, that's another one of his many solo bands. You got UDO, you've got Udo and the Old Gang, and then you've got Dirkschneider. How many solo bands does one man need? Apparently he needs all of them. No disrespect. All right, so the unimaginable, the hard truth of this is Udo's UDO band, when it started up until just recently, in the past maybe 12 years, was straight under the radar. Now, I give the man credit. He works his ass off. He has consistently put out records under the radar for over a decade. Probably closer to almost 2 decades. No, over 2 decades he did under the radar, because it started in 87. These guys were not noteworthy for over half of their career, unfortunately so. However, around 2010, 2011, you started suddenly hearing about them, especially around the same time Accept reformed with their new vocalist, Marc Tornillo. Udo, I think, released the album Rev Raptor, and that was like 2011. And that's when you first started seeing, at least in a very mainstream sort of way, Udo come back out with, his new wave of solo music. And since then, he's just kind of been reinventing himself. It was kind of hit or miss for the first couple years, but right now, within the past 3 or 4 years, he has just ascended to new heights, and it's literally taken him all of his career to get here. Now, that being said, it doesn't rival what he did in Accept. He can't really outlive that, and Accept is still the bigger band than UDO. You do have the two parties, because UDO is now a lot of what was Accept. You have former Accept drummer Stefan Schwartzman playing guitar. You have, not playing guitar, but playing drums. You have former Accept guitarist Stefan Kaufman playing guitar. You have now, just within the past year or two, it's been more than a year, it's probably been about 3 years ago, that Peter Baltus quit Accept, which was a huge shock, and then joined UDO. So you've got like 3, now 4 former members of Accept and UDO. You got Udo, you got Peter, you've got Stefan, and you've got another Stefan. And then you've got his son, I forget what his name is. Anyhow, Sven. There you go. And then you got Andrei Smirnov also in the band. So you've got a lot of people saying that UDO is more Accept than Accept, and Accept is just a cover band. That being said, you can't touch Accept's legacy. That's just the facts. But here in the past 2 or 3 years, Udo's come into a new height of popularity. And I feel like it's owed to him because of how hard he's worked, and he is an absolute legend. That also kind of makes him very hard to rate. Because if it wasn't for that revival of old school music between 2009 and 2014, you probably still wouldn't be hearing about Udo anymore. But he did get a second career out of that, and he's riding that wave. He's going on big, massive tours. He's doing festivals. The man is bigger than he's been in a long, long time. But that is, again, the product of the 2009 to 2014 resurgence of metal. He's been on top of the world, so to speak, for the past 13 years. And you got to compare the past 13 years to the past 36 that he's been doing this. That's a very small amount of time. So we got to be fair. I want to put him at a C tier rating. But I'm going to put him at the top of the C tier. C++. Because it's almost like UDO is a band on the rise, like he's new. But this is the most mainstream success that he's had in a very long time. And if he continues to gain his popularity and significance, because you're hearing about him almost all the time now, whereas before you weren't hearing about him at all. If this continues, I could see him becoming an A tier. Like no lie. It's almost like he's hit a new stride. Ulcerate. This list is about to ulcerate me. That's going straight into no context, and Lord have mercy, I can't read that either. Unleashed. Unleashed is about to get unleashed into no context as well. Guys, that no context, that 12th row is about half full. Just saying. All right, Visions of Atlantis. This is another female-fronted melodic, I guess, symphonic metal, power metal outfit. This is the band that was from Austria. While their work is generally regarded as good, you do hear about them a bit. You know, they're sort of mainstream. Now, I wouldn't say they're completely mainstream, but you do hear about them from time to time. Honestly, I believe they're actually going on tour with Seven Spires. Or they have toured with Seven Spires. So they are a lesser known band. That being said, their work is generally rated as very highly regarded, very good. But then again, they're also not reinventing the wheel. They're just kind of a newer band that's kind of on the rise and trying to get their foothold into that, you know, female-fronted melodic symphonic metal. I feel like in time, because we have been hearing about them for a little while, honestly, they could be a little bit bigger in time. So for that, I'm going to put them in the same bracket as Unleash the Art. No, I can't. Wait, where did I put Seven Spires? Okay, you know what? I'm going to put Visions of Atlantis. I can't put them the same way because that's fair. I'm going to have to put Visions of Atlantis at an F tier rating. This market is starting to get flooded with female-fronted symphonic metal. I would definitely say Seven Spires is about on the same tier as Unleash the Archers. And if Visions of Atlantis is slightly below that, then, of course, they would be a lower tier. I feel like in time they could be a bit bigger. They just got to get their footing. They just haven't gotten enough love yet. Alright guys, that's it for me. This was part 8 of the never-ending Tiermaker Saga. Guys, I was really hoping to get through a little bit more of that, but we had so many big and noteworthy names. We just had to cover them all, to be fair. That being said, we have only 3 rows. That's it. 3 rows remaining of this Ultimate Tiermaker Challenge, which means the next video will be the finale. As always, if you enjoy this content and you would like to see more stuff like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and tell your friends about this. Again, the past few days, this channel has kind of lit up a little bit, and I am very grateful for that. As always, if you know anything about any of these bands in the illustrious no context category, please comment them below so I can get some help on where to place them. Because at the end of all of this, I would like to place them where they belong according to fact. Also, just be cool and check in. I like hearing from you guys. Your opinions, good, bad, or ugly, I swear I read all of them. Until next time, this is your boy Mark, and I'm out.